There we go. And yeah, sometimes it takes Luke a moment or two to get his his computer. It's being held by hinges. That doesn't actually connect anymore.
Yeah, I think I watched him do a Pokemon stream, and it seemed like the whole operation was held together by willpower alone.
It is.
He was doing it.
Well, a few years when we started the podcast, his computer is held together by a pillow holding the screen up. So he's at least, moved ahead to hinges. I can't say much. I'm running a 12-year-old laptop with Windows 7 to do this. So it's like I just can't be bothered to, change my tech or anything.
I kind of got lucky because I've got like a half decent setup. Like my PC's kind of like what most people would call like mid-spec, but for me it does everything and then some. But it's exponentially more powerful than anything I get to use in my day job when we had an office. So I said this to a few people, although like it's hard to talk about like lockdown and the pandemic because lots of people have had terrible situations that have occurred because of it in regards to, they've lost people, work, etc., etc. But I can only really talk about the hand I've been dealt. And essentially it's allowed me to sit in this seat using this setup to do a job that barely needs anything more than like a basic laptop. So it's allowed me to sort of do things in complete luxury. Whereas normally they're just like, whenever I went in the office, they're like, here's your laptop. It's all we could afford. Get moving.
Yeah. I'm where my office, the computers are notoriously wonky. Hello.
Hello.
There he is.
Got your sunlight streaming in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, thank you for your midnight. Doing it hardcore.
Nah, this is all right. This is actually peak time for me. Like whenever I have to finish some writing work, normally around this time of night, I've got the flat to myself tonight, which is why I can gesticulate and talk this loudly at midnight. And one of the many reasons why this has taken so long to get together. But yeah, like whenever I've got like a piece of work to do or like video editing or anything like this, I mean, part of it's procrastination, I'll admit. But when it gets to sort of this time and like my partner's asleep and everyone on the internet's starting to wind down, that's when I know where it's like, right, there's nothing else for me to do other than the thing that I'm supposed to do now. And I kind of click into gear a little bit. Like all of the stuff I do, it tends to be after midnight. So this is if anything, this is optimal.
Okay, groovy. Yeah, I don't think my wife's the biggest fan of my podcasting because she's teleworking in the next room, but as long as I don't start yelling too much.
Yeah, no, I've had that many times, but just this flat just isn't conducive towards it. But hey, like I said to you guys,
I'm alone.
Like, whenever a chance comes up, I'll let you know immediately because they're so few and far between. So when it comes up, it'll happen. And then the last one was hilarious because it was like that everything's kind of winding down. People, they were going to go, they did this yearly holiday with her workplace and they were all set to go away. And I was like, it's on, we're going to fucking do this. And I let them know. And then literally the day before, I hear this noise from the kitchen. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound good. And I just hear, Andy, I've got a positive test. I was just like, are you fucking kidding me? So I had to,
like I said, it's like, I had to watch RoboCop again. Oh no.
Yeah, what a shame, man.
Can handle that. I guess so. I guess we'll run into it then and do a bit of an intro. I'll do a plot, and then we just kind of like riff it for a while and see where it goes. I'll push the ball in a certain direction, and
that's what I was about to say. You pushed me around. I'll talk.
Okay, Luke, you want to get roaring?
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
Tiger.
In the year 1987, we met a hero who was part man, part machine, old bastard.
Oh, bastard. Why is he a bastard?
All cops are bastards.
Oh, okay. Got you. Anyway, yes, today's film is Pete Well and the Robotic Cop.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
This is perhaps the most
cursed podcast of all time.
Well, like I
Yeah.
was just saying, I had to watch RoboCop like 3 times in the past year. It's not the worst fate in the universe. It's
No.
what was the Robert Pattinson film again? Do you remember the title?
Oh, harsh. No.
We talked about it for like
Yeah, I
an
can't
hour.
remember. I can't remember the name of the film.
Anyway, that sci-fi one with him, if I had to watch that like 3 times, I would have like killed myself. Not
Yeah,
even
that
just,
was miserable.
not even quality, just because it's so much of a downer. This is Matt here.
This is Luke.
Welcome to our Sci-Fi Police Academy.
And for talking RoboCop, there was only one man I was willing to do it with, and that is, of course, Andy Hamilton. Say hello, Andy.
Hello. This is a long time coming. I think this was pitched to me in the ill-fated 2020. I think
Yep.
right at the start, where it was like, we're going to do RoboCop, you have to come on. And obviously someone says, come on and talk to me about RoboCop for an hour. So I'm like, absolutely, yeah, I'm there. And then gestures wildly, everything happened, and it just became a logistical nightmare. But by God, we got there in the end. Unless, of course, something terrible happens to me during the recording, which is going to be great publicity for you guys. But I mean, it's so cursed that I'm not ruling out the possibility. So keep the camera rolling.
Yeah, with some
All
gangsters
right.
bust in and execute you gangland style then.
Well, I remember
could
Luke was
happen.
like, I'm not going to contact Andy now because that means the pandemic will kick back in.
Mm.
Twice we had a date nailed in and the UK went into lockdown on that day.
Yeah, it's been brutal. And then there was another one torpedoed by actually getting COVID. It's just been, yeah, it's been a time coming. But cheers for, I guess, holding on, putting RoboCop in a holding pattern, because I appreciate that it's I mean, as we're about to get into, it's a movie that if you're doing a podcast about sci-fi, it really has to come up at some point. It's an essential.
Yeah. And it's one of those ones, like if it was Alien, we could be like, well, okay, we'll do Alien, you can have Aliens or something like that.
Mm.
But RoboCop, there's RoboCop, and then everything else is shit.
Yeah. Yeah. I like my soft spot for RoboCop 2 notwithstanding. Yes,
It's a bit of fun, but it's not in the same league.
Yeah. It's a totally different film. It's like we'll get into the details of RoboCop 1, no doubt, but yeah, it's kind of like the silly like when you get a horror film and after like maybe the first movie you stop fearing the legendary character and it becomes more about watching them do the cool stuff.
Yeah, you're rooting for Freddy in most of them.
Yeah, exactly. RoboCop 2 did that like immediately. I'm not saying that you weren't rooting for RoboCop, but it was like, he's Spider-Man now. Like he's a superhero. It's RoboCop, of course. He's here to save the day. And just like, with the exception of like a couple of like really unsubtle links to the drug wars, it just went, well, all of the subtext, let's just get rid of that. It's RoboCop. It's like when you hear the word RoboCop and you don't know the film, it sounds inherently ridiculous. And it is, when you look at it as well, it's a robot and a cop. Of course, it's these things. The second one is that movie. Like
right.
That's what it is. Whereas the first one, as we'll get into, there's a lot more to it than that. But
well, this has a weird place in the pop culture thing, as it's this and Rambo were just like aggressively marketed to kids in the 80s. So I'm thinking, of course, you just saw the poster, and if you're 7 or 8 years old, that's like the most badass thing possible. And I remember going to a friend's house and playing the I think it was the Commodore 64 RoboCop game obsessively.
It's amazing that you said that. So that's essentially how I found out about RoboCop. So
yeah, same here.
I was born in 1984, so I didn't see it at the cinema. And the VHS was obviously already out by the time I was sort of aware of media. But I was one of those kids who was a really good reader, and my parents, not wanting to kind of, downplay that, they would always buy me magazines and books and stuff like that. And then I started getting into video games. So a video game magazine just became a really obvious out and is basically at this point responsible for me being sat here in a roundabout way. But the first issue of a video game magazine that I ever got myself had RoboCop on the front cover. And it would have been early 90s. and it was RoboCop 3, the video game on the C64, which is a terrible movie. It's not a bad video game, and has one of the all-time best title musics like ever. By the way,
Better than RoboCop.
do you know what? It's real. The legendary C64 RoboCop 1 music and the title music for RoboCop 3, they're very different vibes, but I struggle to choose between which one I prefer. But on the tape, they had cover tapes on the front cover. It had a demo of RoboCop 3. So, and it was just this first-person shooting thing where you just shot a bunch of dudes as a big robotic cop who, I think on the front cover, it was a shot from the movie where he's like protecting that little girl. So instantly in my, would have been like maybe 7 or 8 years old, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen, right? And then later that day, or whatever time is hazy around those days, I went to speak to my friend. And I was telling him about it. And I remember him going, oh, check this out. Going into his toy box and pulling out a toy I'd never seen before. And it was like a die-cast RoboCop. Okay. You'd never get this these days. But he had like a hole down his arm. And you could load in those, those caps that you put in cap guns.
Okay, yeah.
You loaded them into his arm and then put his gun in. And he had a switch on the back. You tapped the switch and he fired the gun with like actual cap explosions.
Nice.
And obviously suddenly that's the best thing ever. RoboCop's really, really cool. And it was that same guy who one day was like, and again, it must have been around that time. So I must have been, it would have been about 92, 93. So 8 or 9 at the most, right? And he's like, I've got this video. All right. And it was a taped off, I think, taped off TV video, put it in. And it was RoboCop. And yeah, we watched the whole thing there. And because I've never really ever got like scared of movies and stuff. I think the only film that ever scared me was the end of He-Man, when Skeletor pops out the slime. That's about it. The rest of it, I'm good. And I think having this exposure to RoboCop as this kind of kid-friendly hero from the video game magazine, from my friend having the toy, from the fact that RoboCop 3 was basically aimed at a younger audience, I went into the first film with him already being quite palatable. So when I'm seeing him murdering people in horrendous ways, right, and some of the gore and stuff that we'll get into, I didn't mind it because I knew that they were the bad guys and he was the good guy. So, but I just remember my friend being pretty terrified by the whole thing and like really like emotionally scarred by watching RoboCop far too young. But for me, that was like the doors had opened and responsible for a load of terrible decisions I'll make in the next 25, 30 years.
Luke, what video game got you into RoboCop?
Oh, no, it wasn't the video games. So I was born 1990, but growing up, my mum was still in college. So I used to spend most of the first 5 years of my life with my grandparents, my uncle and auntie, who had a big collection of videotapes. And I just used to watch like the entire Schwarzenegger catalog on a loop at the age of 3. So Terminator, Terminator 2, Commando, Predator. And then they had this other one. It's like, well, it's not Arnie, but I think you'll like it. And it was RoboCop. And I did like it. So it just entered the rotation with like Terminator and Commando. It's just, yeah, here's another film where a big tough guy shoots like 90 people.
That's sort of it, isn't it? Like, looking at it now, it's a totally different movie. And I mean, hell, even if you were our age in 87, right? It's a different movie now to when it was then for a myriad of different reasons. But I just, there is something inherently cartoonish about it by design. Like, I don't know if you've seen any interviews with Verhoeven talking about it and like the gore, that he is like, no, it's intentionally over the top for humor reasons. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to be a cartoon. It's meant to sort of like there comes a point in ultra, I've said this on a few different podcasts about a few different films and games, but there comes a point in ultra violence where it stops being horrific and starts becoming hilarious. And RoboCop goes just over that line with everything. So it's always been like hyper realistic and intentionally meant to be a little bit funny. And I think as long as you're not scarred by poor Emil's death, then I think a lot of it is, if you're a kid watching it, I mean, I can only talk from my own experiences, but I kind of found him to be the robotic hero who goes around and stops these horrible villains taking over the city. So I was all right with it.
Well, I think even as a kid, I could tell it was something a little bit different. But because I didn't watch it as much as the Terminator films. Because the Terminator films, it was very clear, here's a good guy, here's a bad guy, the good guy wins. Maybe someone dies along the way. Whereas RoboCop, I could tell there was something weird about it. And when I came back to it 10, 15 years later, I'm like, oh, this film's great because there's something weird and different about it. But as a kid, I was like, oh, I like the RoboCop scenes, but there's a lot of talking and there's a lot of jokes I don't get. So
I mean, it's a satire at heart, right? I mean, that was the thing that didn't take with Starship Troopers with a lot of people, because that's just super satirical. So with blood, aortal gun splashes. Sure, why not? The aortal gun splashes. I guess I'll take this opportunity to quickly throw in the plot, and then we'll really get, open it up and pump a few rounds into it. Some kind of sci-fi dystopian Detroit is falling apart. Crime is out of hand and police are being shot down on the streets. Fortunately, Omni Consumer Products, OCP, is on the case. They've got the ED-209 murder robot ready to replace the police, while young upstart Bob Morton has something else on the mind. Enter Murphy, a stand-up cop reassigned to the worst district in Detroit. He manages to get murdered on his first day on the job by Clarence Boddicker and crew, henchman of Dick Jones, the ruthless corporate mind behind the ED-209. But Murphy ends up as RoboCop, the project that Morton was cooking up. RoboCop is an instant success who shoots criminals directly in the dick. But Morton's reward is a coke party that ends up spelling his doom on the orders of that dick. Actually, it's a different dick, whatever. RoboCop finally sets his target on Boddicker's operations, but the OCP programming stunts his progress and ends up putting Murphy in the middle of a bullet hell. Murphy manages to reunite with his partner of one day prior. They hole up in a steel mill and manage to take out Boddicker's gang despite some bodily and cyborgian trauma. Murphy heads back to OCP, gets Dick Jones fired with incontrovertible evidence, and then shoots the dude out of a skyscraper window, and the best bout of comeuppance you'll see in any film. Okay, that's that.
Pretty much does it.
Yeah, that's one of my 1:30 a.m. writings where I'm looking at the next one and being like, that doesn't actually quite make sense, and have to edit on the fly. Almost makes sense. So
here's the thing that I think is important to say about RoboCop now that you've informed everyone of the plot. And this is why this podcast, this specific one being delayed 18 months, 2 years, however long it was actually a good thing. I'm justifying it, right?
All right.
And that is because, and this is a very poor indicator of the world that we live in, admittedly, but every single day that has passed since the release date of the film in 1987, the film has got better and more relevant.
Yep.
It is unbelievable to watch RoboCop like I did this week. And, for what is probably the millionth time after, seeing the stuff that has taken place over the last 2 years, and seeing the way that RoboCop discusses, rampant endgame capitalism, the militarization of the police force, putting, humanity kind of being stripped further and further away by these things like advertising, social media, technology itself. And it did all of this in 1987 when all of it was just a bit of a joke. And what is kind of fascinating about it is this is something that is a total through line in all of Verhoeven's sci-fi films. And it's I just find that like RoboCop is, for my money, the one that does it the best, because it's the most unbelievably daft one for my money. I mean, Starship Troopers, kind of aliens and stuff like that, and Total Recall wasn't really his story to begin with, but obviously it adapted it for the screen. But RoboCop, again, it's what we said at the start. It's a robot cop. That's it. That's the premise. But it's an unbelievable film to watch in 2022 and just go, when was this made?
Yeah,
it's hard to comprehend how worryingly close we are to the Detroit of RoboCop, and that's what makes it such an important sci-fi film. It's like, for my money, they have to have a bit of that dystopia in it. They have to have a bit of that putting a mirror back on society and going, here it is. It's just that with RoboCop, that mirror image that they turn around and went, hey, look at society, it's you, has just become even clearer and clearer and clearer as every single day has gone on since release. It's ludicrous how on the money it is and how relevant it is, like years and years after release.
My opening line in the summary, some kind of sci-fi dystopian Detroit was supposed to be snarky. So I don't know if that came through or not.
It's unbelievable.
But like when the film first came out, I expect even the idea of the police force being privatized probably seemed ridiculous. This pretty much happened at this point.
Yeah, it's like it clearly riffed on elements that were probably believable hypotheticals at the time.
Right. But yeah, at the time they were so exaggerated to the point of comedy.
It was like when it was originally released, it was kind of a sort of almost like a cautionary tale of like, this is how we could end up if we let this stuff go unchecked. And now when you're watching it, it is a blunt satire of how things are.
Yeah.
Rather than what things could be. And it's sort of that like thing that you can attach to sort of all-time great films, which is just like how they change and how, whether their relevancy is increased or decreased as the years go on. Like there are some films, especially in sci-fi, where like you can watch them in 2022 and just because of the very march of tech, they seem very archaic. Some films get it right. Something like Alien, where you see the ship and everything is like analog and it's all CRTs. No one, it seems, saw flat screen TVs coming, right? But we saw these other things coming, but we didn't see flat screens. That was too beyond the pale. We saw the militarization of the police force, but not flat screen TVs. But that works because it's kind of it's a very clearly defined aesthetic, and it's all very consistent and it works tight. But then you look at something like Hackers, which is a fun film and it's got a lot of memes attached to it, but it's because of how completely off-piste it was. Isn't there like a part in like 90s Keanu Reeves vehicle, Johnny Mnemonic, where he downloads the entire internet onto like an SD card in his head and it's like 10 meg or something like that? It's something ridiculous like that, where they just did not see it coming. Like they just didn't get it.
Well, to go back to Starship Troopers, he did predict how big the internet would be.
Right.
That film actually cuts to the internet a lot, and that's where people are getting their news. And their news is pure propaganda and conspiracy and nonsense because they're getting it from the internet. But on the other hand, in that film, they send each other messages by shipping discs instead of sending it online. So maybe it's not 100% perfect.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's the thing I like about RoboCop is it doesn't really predict anything.
In terms of only really kind of RoboCop and the Ed 209.
Yeah,
mainly the only tech we see. It's just how society has changed.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of nailing a future society to the wall, basically.
I'm thinking of things from 1987 or around that time, and The only other thing that really has this mind behind it would be some of those, the comic books around that time. Like I feel like the way RoboCop functions is similar to the comic book run of Watchmen or The Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah.
The
like that.
yeah, the little TV panels in Dark Knight always make me think of RoboCop because it's
I
the
think I get
same
them mixed
sort
up
of.
in my head.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people say that RoboCop is the best Judge Dredd film they've made.
Yes. Isn't there some chat that it was meant to be? Like, this is one of those things I've never, ever looked into, kind of one of those urban myths.
I don't think it was ever meant to be, but the guys writing it were big into 2000 AD and DC Comics and stuff.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I mean, the comic book link's really strong because, like, didn't Frank Miller write the sequel?
Yeah, Hero RoboCop too.
Yeah. So,
and then when they did the animated version of The Dark Knight Returns, Peter Weller does the Batman voice, so it's kind of like Batman as RoboCop, which is awesome.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Official story is the two writers of this film met working on the set of Blade Runner and came up with the idea for RoboCop, which I definitely like to believe that's true.
Yeah, it's kind of like how the failed version of Dune, resulted in Alien, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes it just works out. Peter Weller, I want to talk actors a little bit, I guess, because we do around this time, but Peter Weller is an interesting one. He's different. I mean, I guess that's his vibe, and that's why he works so well as a robot. And I part of his casting was just like, oh, he fits in the suit, I believe. But
it was, I remembered that it was that he was a dancer, and that's why he could do these moves. But apparently, it's that he was a martial artist, and that's why he was good at the movement. But Peter Weller is up there with Schwarzenegger in my book, as it does actually take skill to play a robot.
Yeah.
Like
to do it well.
You genuinely believe he's a machine the way he moves.
Yeah.
And Arnold was good at that too. Like, he was very deliberate in moving like a certain body part in a different way than a human would.
Yeah. It's one of those things that and it's one of the things I like about podcasts like this, if you're just blowing some smoke up you a little bit, which is, and it's kind of a bit of a dying art, this, but like when DVDs first came out and there was like making of features that you actually watched, right? Rather than just it's on Netflix, right? It was amazing to see this narrative switch from people like Peter Weller in RoboCop, Arnie definitely in Terminator, where it was sort of like, it was this kind of like real hack film journo line where they'd be like, well, the acting's robotic because it's Arnie or because it's Peter Weller, and it was sort of like a bit of a joke and stuff like that. And then the making ofs appeared, and you got to see these like never seen before bits of footage where they're like teaching Arnie not to blink while he's firing a gun at point blank and stuff like that. And then suddenly you're like, oh no, hang on, there's an art to this. And it's something that I really like only feel has been sort of appreciated in probably in the last sort of 10, 15 years. Social media has allowed people to sort of share these little clips of Robert Patrick as the T-1000 doing all this like mad stuff to just make sure that he never breaks character and whatnot. And there's a lot of that in RoboCop. There's a lot of cool little moments in RoboCop.
These guys have range, right? I mean, Peter Weller's other big 80s film is Buckaroo Banzai, where he's quite directly charming. Schwarzenegger turned out to also be a comedy actor, which, I guess people have different opinions on how that worked out. But hey, we love it. We love it at this sanctuary. So
it's one of those things where the rise of the internet has meant that you can hear voices other than mainstream film critics.
Yeah.
And mainstream film critics, their taste is so far removed from what the public actually want in films. Like Matt sent me the other day, he found like the Guardian's review of Spider-Man from 2002.
Rex Reed, and put a name on it.
Absolutely slates it. Everything he's saying is just like, this is just not true.
He's like, what kind of crap dialogue? Like, with great power comes great responsibility. That's an actual quote in there. What else? What did he call it? Spider-Man is just the dog and cart version of Batman and Superman. I'm like, what does that even mean?
Yeah,
that's brutal.
Yeah,
that's brutal.
But and this movie also, of course, the whole cast is just like amazing. I mean, these are the best villains ever.
I was reading some stuff about it, and Ronnie Cox playing Dick Jones. In my head, he is like a quintessential villain actor.
Yeah.
But the line was, "Oh, I always played good guys before RoboCop, but I thought it would be fun to be a bad guy." And I'm like, yeah, I can see that it was fun. You're amazing at it.
Everyone in that film who is a villain is fully on it. Like,
oh yeah,
just absolutely going for it in every single scene, just like bouncing every line of dialogue off the walls, gesturing wildly. It's pretty brilliant. But I mean, Clarence Boddicker, I can't think of another film I've seen with Kurtwood Smith in. I don't watch a lot of TV, so I was not aware of, like, it was the 70s show he was in. I think that's right. There was an 80s show as well, or whatever. But yeah, he was the dad in that show. And the clips I've seen of it, I am just like, this is weird. Yeah. Why is he nice? Like, why is he someone's dad? And not telling these bitches to leave, you know, that's what's going on here.
8-year-old Matt watching this movie. Actually, guys, I don't think, Luke, you've talked to him, but Chris Jones, we did a few of the Muso podcasts that you're not into talking about, but we were 8. We were watching RoboCop as one does, and of course his father was Dick Jones, so we had a great time with that.
Can you fly, Bobby?
It's just, yeah, it's endless, it's relentless. Like, and even like the goons in
the goons are perfect.
Gang, they all have gold lines as well.
Oh yeah.
The whole thing, like, and that's something that I've always really liked in a sci-fi movie as well. Like a bit, like a kind of, my favorite thing is like when you can kind of like get into, I see that background character there. He's got a name and like, you know,
laugh.
and it was in like a good example of it is all the RoboCop gang, like all those guys, like, they've all got different they've all got like different gimmicks, different one-liners, and yeah, it's just it makes the world seem a lot more alive.
It's something that I think is just a bit missing from films now. It's just the stuff that you just chuck in there because it's fun.
Yeah,
like especially in a Verhoeven film, there's the main plot, but the bits you remember is it's just a woman with 3 tits for no reason. And
I'll buy that for $1.
Yeah.
Apparently they just threw this in because they came up with it when it was funny. What if a space station misfired and lasered a city in half? And it's just like,
out 2 presidents. Yeah, that was great.
Everything has to have a meaning now. That's the thing. Like, I don't know if you, I don't want to spoil it. It's brand new, but there's some stuff in like Kenobi where I'm like, that doesn't need a reason. It was an innocent thing in the background. A great example, which is less spoilery, is in Solo. They give a reason for his dice, for the reason, like, it's not just a throwaway thing. Like, everything has to have a reason and a place in these kind of mad combined universes. Like, I know that we might get onto this later. I know that like they might be going back to the RoboCop well at some point in the near future, and like the idea of trying to turn something like RoboCop into this like extended universe where everything has a place, it just makes me feel a little bit ill. Like, I like the idea that it's sort of it's even detached from its sequels. Like, apparently this new thing is
it's just a sequel to the 87 one. Yeah.
So like,
that's what Godzilla does all the time.
Terminator pulled it off.
I think it's kind of amazing that like this film does, regardless of what I think of RoboCop 2, and that one bit in RoboCop 3 where he says, "Don't count on it, chum," and then flies after a ninja on a rocket pack, which is one of, I thought I'd hit my head when I first saw that bit. But like, outside of those, like RoboCop 1 does, you don't ever have to watch anything else RoboCop and it still stands up and makes sense. And I kind of like that. Especially when, I don't know what you guys think of like Prometheus and stuff like that, but like, for my money, leave some of this, some stuff is better unexplained. And I kind of like that. I know so much about this film, like all these little characters and in jokes and one-liners and stuff like that, but it's all contained in this one, whatever it is, like 2-hour block, and I don't feel the need to kind of go out of it. But that's what one of the things I love about it is it just every person in that film feels like they have a reason to be there. They don't feel ever like background characters or filler, even the background characters and filler characters. Like the guy who's in the toilet who doesn't do his fly up properly and doesn't finish his piss when Dick Jones walks in. Like you remember that? It's one guy.
No lines.
I feel like there was I don't know where it came from or if it was like from a book or it's just but like there's an accepted wisdom in Hollywood screenwriting at the moment that it's like every scene has to move the plot forward to the next scene. Go, go, go. And like the whole Chekhov's gun thing, if it's there for a reason. And especially the way films are churned out these days, especially in like the Marvel and everything, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, this film comes out on this date and we've got the sequel 2 years later and we got the sequel 2 years after that. And it's like the writers bashed out their script. Okay, we've already storyboarded it. We're calling you the director, but you've basically got nothing to do. There's no space to throw in like, oh, I came up with this idea for a funny scene. Let's do it. Or like, from what I've heard from RoboCop, they were ad-libbing so much stuff. Kurtwood Smith was like, hey, what if I spat blood on the desk? And then Verhoeven's like, yes, hell yeah, let's do that. But there's no space for that anymore.
No.
I mean, there are other films being made.
Yeah.
But in specifically the real mainstream, like blockbuster picture these days. It's just
I think it's fair to say in the sci-fi. I think it's fair to say that in the sci-fi space, it's very dominated by what Marvel did. And I've got to put my hands up. Like, I'll watch a Marvel film.
Oh yeah, I still basically go
and
see
I'll have a damn good time watching it, right? But my issue with them, and it sucks because it makes, whenever I talk about them, I always come across like I'm being negative, but it's not really their films I'm being negative about. It's kind of what they've done, which is now everything has to be that.
The cinematic universe, yeah.
Or like as you said, a film where it's like there's no wasted motion. Everything needs to be moving the plot forward. So any funny moment tends to happen during a plot moment, like a one-liner or something like that. And because it's all very similar, you see these almost scene for scene exact moments in other films, like big monster is coming out, cut to a shot of two people kind of looking up at it, the heroes, one of them says something funny, and it's nice to sort of see a film that obviously doesn't have any of that because of when it was made, but doesn't feel old-fashioned because of what it's doing. It still feels like RoboCop could come out tomorrow and be RoboCop. Like,
you're making me realize something RoboCop does so well, because RoboCop is very, very funny. And it has really great dramatic scenes, but it doesn't feel the need to force a joke in after every dramatic scene.
Yeah.
When something terrible happens in RoboCop, it lets you sit with it. Whereas, the modern like Marvel template blockbuster, the great example is Thor Ragnarok, where at the end you get that moment where Asgard is destroyed. You know, Thor's character arc is coming to this conclusion over a long trilogy, and like Taika Waititi's giving comedy lines in between everything else. And it's like, why can't it just sit? Whereas RoboCop, you might say that it's like, it gives you a bit of whiplash because you'll go from this really ridiculous scene where they're watching the guy on TV, I'll buy that for $1. And then it's like, oh, here's this man learning that he had a family and he died.
Yeah.
And now he's going to go and stab someone to death about it. But it's like, that's life. Life has moments of tragedy, moments of comedy. You don't have to lighten everything. You can let some things punch the audience.
That bit that you just mentioned there is like, again, that's kind of like one of the sort of great bits that tends to go missing, is in the exploration of all of the really obvious stuff now, you know, the police force stuff, the, you know, capitalism stuff, is there is that kind of like weird moment where it's like, and it's not even that long a bit. It's like literally he has those weird flashes. He basically goes to his, you know, old house. Everything kind of goes wrong, and it's not that much of the film. It's a short bit, but I just found that was like one of the sort of like a moment where it kind of veered into like hard sci-fi for like a couple of minutes. Like it sort of became really Philip K. Dick all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Where it was like, what is humanity when there's not much of it, but there's a bit of skin face left. How much of us is the human form.
That's the sort of thing that gives this film so much resonance, and why we're talking about it's basically a new release so many years later. Because again, I saw Doctor Strange. I had a great time. Of course, you have a great time watching Marvel movies. I couldn't tell you what the plot was. I forgot already.
Well, it was probably a film. If it was anything like the first Doctor Strange film, it was a very expensive movie that essentially existed to do one thing at the end.
Yeah.
If it's anything like that one, I would love to have that kind of budget where it's like, right, we need to make this one stone appear. Just spend 200 million or whatever it is.
Well, I will say I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say we do get a very Raimi trip there this time, at least. So that's a fun wrinkle in the the first Doctor Strange was like, oh, we get this weird astral stuff. So that was the a little bit of flavoring. But again, what was the actual plot of either of them? I couldn't explain it now. Or RoboCop, easy.
Doctor Strange 2's plot was pretty easy, but it's just like, oh, she wants to steal this child, he wants to stop her. It's pretty much that.
Right, but RoboCop, it's very it's Jesus Cop, right, and to a certain extent. So it's one of the 8-story templates, like writ large. Is it 8 stories there are, or 12? It's one of those numbers, I think.
But the whole thing about him, like he's a machine and he's trying to find his humanity again. I love that it's done really well, but I also love that at the end, he can't just get over his programming. It's not one of those cheesy, like, oh, just remember you love your family and you can beat it.
Yeah.
He cannot shoot Dick Jones until the old man fires him. And I don't want to spend too much time doing this, but the 2014 remake, at the end of that, he does just overcome his programming and shoot the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's shit.
Yeah. For my money, the 2014 remake, I don't like it. But when I see people saying it's like the worst film ever and stuff like that, I'm like, so it's only that bad because
they called it RoboCop.
Because they called it RoboCop, except for the bit you just said.
Yeah,
because that's the bit where it like fundamentally changes the point. You know what I mean? Like that. It was like I can understand some of like the like the changes just to sort of accommodate technology and changes and whatnot. And I can see that they wanted to kind of make it its own film as well. When they took the piss out of the original RoboCop costume, I was already on the defensive. I'm not going to lie, but that bit I was like, oh no, you've balls this. Like you were on the touchdown to be like a solid, if unspectacular movie. But that there for me is like, oh no, you missed the point. You didn't watch RoboCop. Or if you did, you weren't paying attention. Because like, again, maybe it's as I've got older, and maybe it's the events of the last 2 years. It's not really. It's been since 1987. Nothing really has changed when it comes to the way that the police treat people. But like, and again, maybe this is me imprinting my own thing on it. But as I've got older as well, I've also found that it's not just Murphy's struggle against his new, body and programming that's stopping his humanity, but is that like maybe something to say about, being a cop, that you kind of have to put that into a box somewhere sometimes
in the military?
Do it
in the military. I know the most important part of training is not making sure you can do this and you can do that. It's making sure that you stop seeing your enemy as human. The main thing they have to train you to do is be able to kill a man. And as the police gets more and more militaristic, that's what they're doing as well, to the point that they will pull out again, this is very primarily the American police. They will pull out their gun and blow someone away before they even try and talk to them, because they've been taught that's what you do. They've had that reinforced by the fact that all of their colleagues are doing it and getting away with it. So and anytime a police officer does make a mistake and kill someone, the rest of the police force is, I don't know if they're programmed or encouraged or straight up told to defend, deny, don't admit any wrongdoing. And so they're just further and further just boxing up that emotion and that feeling of, oh, maybe we shouldn't just do this.
Yeah. It's amazing that RoboCop somehow managed to avoid falling into like the Punisher territory. Because like, I mean, I'm a big Garth Ennis fan, so I really like his run on the Punisher, where again, he kind of turns this, Frank Castle a little bit into like, you're not supposed to be rooting for him. Like he's killing these people. He has his reasons, but he's not necessarily the good guy. But yet you look at a lot of people who, are into guns. They're all like, there was that stuff recently where like Marvel fans were almost trying to reclaim the Punisher logo from people who just wanted to shoot people.
Well,
like
the fact
and stuff like that.
Whereas, actual cops have Punisher stickers on their car.
Yeah.
So fucked.
Which is kind of missing the point. But like RoboCop managed to frame it in such a way that it never ever got that. Like it's always been seen as like, no, that this is how we think you are. Like this is you're never supposed to aspire to RoboCop. Like,
well, that's where the other one that the 2014 really missed the ball is, I think the whole point is that his memory, everything stripped away, where he's got like this contiguous personality going on in the 2014, which that for me, that kind of, again, change the title. It was like if
you just call it Drone or something, because that's what it was mostly about.
Yeah.
It's a superhero movie at that point, isn't it?
It wasn't the best film ever made, but if it had just been like, hey, here's an interesting film about, what's happening with drones, I'd be like, oh, yeah, that was all right. We'd probably have done a podcast on it already. But the fact that they fucking called it RoboCop and missed everything that made RoboCop interesting.
Well, the contours of RoboCop are about 100 minutes, right? That's how big the RoboCop universe is.
Yeah.
Perfect 100 minutes, but yeah. Well, as long as you're up for some ultra violence.
But yeah, RoboCop does attempt to like arrest a lot of people and stuff. He doesn't just go on killing sprees. There's even the bit when he gets Clarence the first time. He's like, you're a cop. You have to arrest me. And he does.
Yeah. And it's a great line. Don't move or there will be
trouble.
Pause. Trouble. And that's it, it's and he's right. They moved. There was trouble.
Yeah.
He's a man of his word, a robot of his word.
And you can't have any problem with a character who shoots a rapist in the dick.
Of course.
Right. He does go straight to that, though, which seems a little bit against legal code.
I think that should be standard practice.
So, one of my favorite adaptations of that is in the Commodore 64 RoboCop game. That is the level 1 boss, that dude. And it changes from side-scrolling RoboCop action to you're a crosshair on screen and the guy's got, and he sort of just slides backwards and forwards. I'm doing it for those listening. I'm sliding backwards and forward in my seat. But yeah, he slides backwards and forwards and you've got to shoot him. But obviously this is on the C64, so there is no way of doing shooting through a dress. The dress, you shoot that, you've killed a game over. So in that, you have to shoot him on his arm because it's sticking out.
Right.
That's the part they have to do it. And I just remember like failing that the first time I got to it. Because I was like, oh, right, I got to shoot this guy in the dick. So did it, and it just offed her straight away. And I was like, all right, cool. That's not what I was supposed to do.
Yeah, this wasn't on podcast. This was in the office where I was saying one of my first big video game disappointments was the Aerosmith game where you cannot shoot the band.
Yeah.
I don't care about all these guys in black hoodies. I want to shoot the band because they're on stage the entire time. They're making themselves a target.
So RoboCop has a lot of violence, obviously, but I feel like most of its violence is telling the story. Apart from maybe the first scene when he becomes RoboCop, where we get the classic superhero scene of him driving around doing not doing crimes, but
crimes.
Dealing with crimes. Because then we have, he discovers who he is. He goes after Clarence's gang. He found out about Dick. He goes after Dick. And then finally he goes and has the final showdown. And also, each action scene, you can see his character through the action. When you're first seeing him, he is totally the machine. And the shootout in the
Yeah, that's an
place.
amazing scene.
That's peak superhero cinema, because there's, he's going to win. He's superheroing it, but it just looks great. And he's just like, turning, like barely even looking, and just taking all these guys out. But by the end, when he's fighting Clarence and he doesn't even have the helmet on, he's like going for him, right? And he's like stabbing people in the throat, and he's fighting aggressively. And it's like, oh, this is his humanity is coming out.
Yeah, he's trying to survive.
And then right at the end, when he kills Dick Jones, like up until then, he's always just like one shot, one kill. He basically unloads a clip into Dick Jones. Like, he's pissed at this guy.
I was I just noticed this watching it last time, that when Dick Jones is falling down, his has such elongated arms.
His long arms.
It's like this weird puppet or something they use for that shot.
Yeah, it's so annoying, that one bit. It's like
probably
honestly,
the only bad effect in the film.
Yeah, it winds me up because it's the only bad effect in the film, but it's god awful. It's so bad. Like, in a film that not only has some of the best practical effects you'll see, but also like was just blessed by good luck for some shots. Like, I mean, the one that everyone goes to, just before poor Emil meets his end, there's a part where the police car that ends up hitting him, it drives past the camera, right? And as it drives past the camera, a hubcap goes and spins past the camera. That was not planned. That hubcap flew off the car and bounced perfectly past the camera, and they were just like, leave that in.
Yeah.
So it had everything going for it. It didn't just have like these incredible effects, but even like the ones that weren't meant to happen were landing in their lap, and then they kicked Dick Jones out of the building and used like one of the worst whatever that technique was, that kind of like early green screen stuff where it's just, and it's his arms. What? I mean, it looked bad anyway, but I mean, what was wrong at the end of Die Hard, man? like that looks fine. Couldn't they have just gone with that? Oh, it was a year later. They'd invented the technology. There we go. In 1 year,
maybe the director of Die Hard was watching RoboCop, and he just like turns to his team. He's like, "Guys, we've got to do better than that."
Yeah, well, they literally did just drop him, didn't they?
Yeah,
that's why he's got the look. They didn't tell him the timer. They said, "Right, we'll count to 3 and drop you," and they just dropped him, and that's why he's got
the genuine shock on his face,
genuine look of fear on him. So yeah, maybe that's what they needed to do. They just needed to chuck Dick Jones out of a window, but no, it was a year later before they mastered that technique clearly. But
I'm wondering if this is the last time we really saw live action stop motion.
It kind of is, because Tippett, who did the stop motion in this, was then working on Jurassic Park. And it was during Jurassic Park that they made the decision to switch to CG.
Yeah. So I was I'm sitting there wondering if there was any major. Well, of course, there's that.
I mean, there were other stuff, but I don't know if there's any other, like you say, major stuff.
Yeah.
This is probably the last like big hurrah for stop motion on the cinema screen.
Because you put the ED-209 on the cover of Starlog, right? 2 months after you put RoboCop on the cover, because you can't do that again. I just love
and it's so much personality in the stop motion as well. When he's falling down the stairs is obviously great. And even at the end when he explodes and then the legs are just like kicking around like a decapitated chicken.
But yeah, those 2 bits you've just said there with this big, like seemingly indestructible, force that the police are thinking about using as the general
murder robot
officer on the street, who throughout the film we have seen like not just shoot a guy a bit, but like shoot a guy a lot. That there is the classic example of like, it starts off horrific and then by the end of it you're laughing, like, because it's just so over the top. But like giving that thing character, and not only character, but like basically like comedy beats in like little moments. That to me there sums up like Verhoeven's sort of sci-fi stuff perfectly. It's like this kind of like unbelievable thing that you're seeing from the future that has like a lot of like weird political meanings, but also is like inherently a bit funny.
Yeah.
It's a stupid dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess Verhoeven's just someone who just looks at the world and can see that it is kind of funny, even when it's terrible.
Yeah.
And that comes across really well in the film.
Yeah,
Right.
it's really good.
Again, the through line, we've done our, this is the completion of our Verhoeven. We just went backwards the whole time, yeah?
Yeah. You did, Starship Total, and then this.
Yeah. And Showgirls.
Oh,
Don't
yeah.
forget Showgirls. Sci-Fi takes place in a mirror universe.
I do want to check out Flesh and Blood. Have you heard of that one?
I've heard the title, yeah.
It's his first English language film, and it's like a sword and sorcery thing.
Right.
But like, I don't think it was even released in the States.
And we're not forgetting Hollow Man. We're just forgetting Hollow Man.
Yeah.
Had a good soundtrack, but that's about all you're getting out of that.
What else do we have for like major? I don't know. We were talking design elements. Suits cool. You do 209's a stupid dog. Yeah, the rest
Let's
of
talk
it
about Emil in great detail. that is an unbelievable way to kill someone off in a film.
Yeah.
That guy, to this day, right, dines out on being Emil. Like, that guy can show up at any convention on the planet and be like, see that guy exploding when a car hits him in RoboCop. What do you want me to sign?
What's the most disturbing part of the toxic makeup? There we go. If we really want to get into the
it's the skin like sloughing off at his neck.
Nah, the bit which gets me, the bit which made me go, oh, that's grim, is the skin sliding off his hand and you can see his bones.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm going to go to where the skin went, because he's got those two like elongated figures. Because Luke, the problem with yours is he can't see that, right?
Oh yeah. Whereas he's looking at his own hand.
Can see his hand. Yeah. So I'll take Andy's or my. The fingers are dripping off, because that's as a guitarist, that's relatively dreadful.
Well, that's such a prime example of there was absolutely no reason they had to kill this guy by melting him in acid and then destroying him. But it's great that they did.
But then turning him into goo, right? That's
but I love that bit, because it's like that era of sort of, sci-fi and horror movies. There was that kind of fringe, the kind of like schlocky body horror splatter movie, like things like Street Trash and stuff. All wicked films, and to me that just feels like a little nod to these, like, because none of those films were mainstream. They were all this like weird subculture horror stuff, that all real cult films that have kind of, again, now we have social media, more people can kind of share their love for it, and they're a lot more well known now. But even things like Brain Dead and stuff kind of have a little link to that, where just everything is just horrendous and it dies in the most grim and gory way possible. And that moment just felt like a little bit of a nod to these, essentially as far from the mainstream as you could get at that point in time. Trauma films. It was like a trauma film on the big screen.
Very
Trauma
Toxic Avenger, the way he looks.
Yeah. That I can't believe I didn't go to Toxie straight away. But it just felt like that in a moment, which I kind of love that was, as a fan of all things horrible. It's one thing to have a cool, samurai movie, blood artery,
spray of blood,
spray, like, that's cool. It's nice to see that represented on the big screen, but it was nice that in a big blockbuster we had a bit of trauma style death. I have to admit though, if you're driving that car and you see him in front of you and you think, I'm not getting out the way, I'm gonna hit this guy, you didn't expect him to go up like that, did you? You probably assumed he was going to hit the car and bounce over or bounce forward. You didn't expect him to pop like a balloon. That was, even watching it for the first time, I remember being like, oh,
yeah,
oh, that happens, does it?
Kerwin Smith has such the perfect expression on his face for that as well, because he's a horrible monster, but there is just that touch of like, oh my god, this is horrible on his face at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's why, while it seems counterintuitive, all kids under 10 should watch RoboCop at least once, so they can be like, properly scarred, right?
But yeah, that's I love that part. It's iconic. I've seen people with that on t-shirts. I don't know why I didn't buy this. I can't believe I didn't buy it, but someone made a pin badge of him. It was like on this little store, they made like a pin badge of Emil, kind of going, and I was like, I need to get that. It's like that one shot when he's kind of just coming out. Again, for a character who is like a goon,
Yeah.
and he is literally known for the way he dies. But like, I could talk to you about Emil's untimely demise more than I can talk to you about like a lot of other films. And that's sort of one of the great charms of RoboCop, is just how well fleshed out everything is in it for a reason. There's no wasted moments in RoboCop. Even the throwaway stuff it builds the world, it builds a vibe, it builds something in the film.
You
So
can get the action figure. I was sure they did. I was just making sure that there's plenty of Emil action figures out there. So.
Is it melted Emil, or is it just like a ginger dude?
You can't get the ginger dude. It's all melted.
Oh, it's all melted. I mean, I should probably get a melted.
Yeah, there
Emil.
are. It's got like a little. It's got the little radiation toxic thing on the package. Yeah, you
amazing.
You cannot buy an unmelted Emil.
Does he pop if you tap him?
There's an animatronic plush toy sculpture. That's pretty awesome.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
But again, like that there, what you've just said there sums it all up. Is that like this one moment from the film has a cult following?
Mm-hmm.
Clarence Boddicker has a cult following. RoboCop, it's RoboCop. Murphy's death is like, there's like 3 moments in that are like iconic, whether it be the na or like the actual death itself. Give the man a hand. The way he is dismembered is like,
well, and the whole the Christ
ridiculous
thing of it as well, becoming the American Jesus.
Yeah, it's spectacular. Like,
go back to action figures for a second. So when I was a kid, I really wanted a RoboCop action figure. And I told by my grandparents, I was pretty spoiled. But for whatever reason, I convinced my grandfather to agree to this deal. He would buy me a RoboCop action figure when he could afford it. And until he could afford it, he would give me a cream egg every week.
That's pretty good. Not bad.
And I remember, like, once a week, my granddad would give me my cream egg and be like, because I can't get you a RoboCop just yet. And I've got this very distinct memory of this one day where I can't remember. I was sitting around, I was bored. And my auntie's like, oh, why don't you have your cream egg? And I'm like, no, granddad gives me the cream egg. It's our deal.
Hey, Luke, you still have the tab open? Just getting back to Emil a little bit. How many on Reddit, how many pages of Emil porn do we get?
Oh, I don't have the tab open, but I can check. It's not on Reddit. Do you want to explain what you're referencing?
Yeah. Plugging Luke's other podcast, the Game Show, we were you're supposed to guess I guess there's a video game character in this. Well, Emil was in a video game character that does not have any pages of Rule 34 pornography.
Oh, there's none. There's none at all. Surely not. If you thought about it, it's on the internet. That's how it works.
The only one they got a result from was some old dude from Final Fantasy 14.
That somehow surprises me, because that game is full of deviance. Not just characters, the people who play it. Like that game is deviant heaven. I know a lot of them.
But 30-year-old PC characters, the fleens were not safe.
So one thing that I do feel I have to bring up, because this is very specific. Now, Matthew, you might not be able to.
Oh, there's a lot of porn of the bunny from the rabbit from Zootopia, but as RoboCop, but also naked. Apparently, that's a big thing for people.
What was in this drink? That's a sentence that made no sense to me at all, apart from RoboCop.
Naked RoboCop. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you might have no frame of reference for this, so I'm going to tell you there might be, but you might have to add something to it. Luke, your mileage may vary. There is a famous version of RoboCop over on these shores that is known as the ITV edit of RoboCop. And
okay.
luckily for me, it was not the first version I saw. So I got to see it after the fact. And that's why it was so very confusing to me. But for a lot of people, this was their RoboCop for ages. This was RoboCop because no one had the VHS. That was something you'd need to buy. We were all too young. It was on TV. They taped it off TV, so they had their copy of RoboCop. This was their RoboCop for the longest time. Basically, ITV, even though the film was on past the watershed, I guess they kind of appreciate the fact that like a lot of kids were watching it. It was kind of, RoboCop. By the time it was on terrestrial TV, it was many years after it had been out on VHS and been at the cinema. RoboCop was very much trending towards a younger audience at this point. They basically did like a fully censored version of it, but instead of removing the scenes, which they did for the violence, they like changed certain bits. So like you'll see someone firing and it'll cut short, but it's implied violence rather than ridiculous violence. But the swearing is what they did is they redubbed loads of dialogue. And it's incredible. Okay. The most famous one is when Murphy is being rebuilt. He crushes the guy's hand. He goes up to the camera and he goes, "You're going to be one bad mother crusher." It's so good. It's so good. There's that bit where when the guy's talking in the toilet to him and he's making his threats and he says once I even called him like an asshole, like what, it's something like once I even called him idiot, like, it's a completely out of place voice, but it's hilarious. Oh, the best part, how could I forget the guy in the convenience store that RoboCop shoots? When he's walking towards RoboCop going, "Fuck me," they didn't even do a good job. So he's going, "Why me? Why me? Why me?" as he gets closer and closer shooting RoboCop. But like for so many people, this was the version. And when they finally saw it like years later and were like, "Hang on a minute, Murphy gets fucked up." Like that, like, because that was gone. That was gone. It was basically like you saw them start shooting and then it cuts to the bit where his body kind of drops down and she comes in and is like, "Well, Murphy." It cuts straight to that. But that was like the common version. That was the version that pretty much everyone I went to school had seen. Like, and even I watched it probably more than not, because I never owned the video or like had my copy of it. It was just my friends who had seen for the first time. So for the longest time, there was this version of RoboCop that everyone was watching that had zero violence in it and just the most hilariously badly edited swearing. Someone has got to put it on YouTube, but I'm sure it'll be on there if I look for it. But
yeah,
it's
the American equivalent, and it's not like everyone watches it that way, but I think the Big Lebowski has the notorious edit,
right?
The famous, "This is what happens when you take a stranger to the Alps," right? So at least from my perspective, that would be the best known one. Yeah, RoboCop. My buddy across the street, we had the proper video. I think his dad paid $80 for it in like 1987. So let's be real. That one was slightly edited.
It was, yeah.
Criterion got that 8 extra seconds of ultra violence back in, but
yeah. For what it's worth as well, like I literally just went onto YouTube and typed in RoboCop ITV.
Yep, same. It's the first result
thing is very, very specifically, here is the ITV edit of RoboCop. So it's very much a thing.
Just added that to my watch later. Yeah,
it's fantastic because it's so badly done. Like it wouldn't be like the violence cutting out of it would be fine. Like it still tracks. I mean, you're missing so much violence that it's inherently quite funny, because when you actually know what it like the bit where the guy shoots where Ed 209 shoots the dude onto the table, it's literally like you see him shoot, you see him fly back on the table, that's it, that's the end of it. So you don't get 30 prolonged seconds of continuous fire. So it's if you're watching it after you've watched a RoboCop for real, it's hilarious how little you're seeing. But it's the dubbing, it's the redubbing of the lines like they didn't make any effort at all. They just went with like the most obvious stuff. It's so bad, but it's so good at the same time.
I mean, let's face it, the ITV folks are probably making it and giggling, you know?
I heard a rumor, and I don't know this because I don't own a lot of like physical media, but this edit is so infamous. It's on one of the DVDs.
I can believe that. I know on the DVD for Hot Fuzz, there's a spoof version of it.
Right.
Where they take a bunch of the biggest swear words from Hot Fuzz and do their ITV style.
Right, nice.
Like when he shoots the priest and he goes, Jesus Christ. In this one, he's like, peas and rice. Like that.
Yeah. I heard that, there was like, this was such an infamous bad edit job that they were like, it's kind of worth putting on there. And it's like I said, it's one of those like really weird, unique RoboCop things that some people have like really fond. Even I do. I have like a fond memory of this being like the version I watched for the longest time, even though it's nonsense.
Like the Hero Turtles.
I'm looking at my Blu-ray, which is pretty bare bones, but I can watch it in Japanese if I want. So I got that going for me.
That's good.
Watch it with the family to follow.
I want to see. I want to see the Japanese version of RoboCop where he just sits around and does fuck all day because there's basically no crime.
That's RoboCop 3, is it? No, that's a cartoon series.
Yeah. Or the live action TV series where he never kills anyone. He just like shoots furniture and it falls on them and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's rough. I've only ever seen those for sale once in my life, the Prime Directives, as they were. The box set.
I've seen them loads of times when I was wanting to buy the actual film. I feel like I always found the fucking Prime Directives.
Bearing in mind, I used to work in an HMV and I never saw them for sale, right? So we just never ordered them in because no one ever wanted them. So they were never in stock. However, the only time I've ever seen them for sale was in a petrol station. They were just on the counter. So it was like, you buy your petrol, you go up to the counter to pay, there's like some sweets, there's some cigarettes and stuff, and RoboCop the Prime Directives DVD box set.
That is exactly the shit I expect to see in a petrol station. Yeah,
it's the only time I've ever seen that nonsense available to buy. They're really bad.
Yeah, I think I caught a couple on Channel 5.
Yeah, some Japanese convenience stores have amazing collections of mockbusters, and as we have thought about having Mockbuster Month around here. So
yeah. So the thing about those dumb RoboCop films, the Prime Directives, the TV series, and RoboCop 3, they're all really bad, and like RoboCop 3 especially is like indefensibly bad. Like it's a terrible movie because it commits the greatest sin of being boring as well, like which is the worst thing you can do with a sci-fi film, because as we all kind of know, if it's bad but it's like good bad, you can get a lot of mileage out of this, but there's no mileage to be had out of RoboCop 3. But I do have a kind of appreciation for it existing, because without it, and without that kind of lowering of the sort of age rating for RoboCop, how they basically turned him into a bit of an action, basically they wanted to sell action figures, for being honest here. Same thing as they sort of did with Alien and Predator in the, a few years later, and Terminator basically came out the gates of it. There was a massive amount of Terminator 2 figures and stuff like that. But like, if they hadn't done that with RoboCop, I probably would never have discovered it as a kid.
That's true.
And I wouldn't have had half the things I would have had to say in this podcast, because I probably wouldn't have watched it until I was, getting into action movies when I was like 13, 14, starting to raid my dad's films and going like, it's Die Hard, brilliant. All right, we'll give this a go. And, I would have approached it much later, but I kind of like that I had that, like, I shouldn't have been watching this at all moment with it. And literally seeing it at different points in my life and being able to appreciate different things. The only other film that I can think of that I've had that with, where I've watched it when I was a kid and it was barely surface level, to like a bit of an older kid and being surface level, to a teenager where I started to get the jokes that I maybe wouldn't have done. And then basically all the way up to mod present day, where I start to be able to sort of see things in society that match it. It's probably Ghostbusters. It's the only film that's been with me that long, where I've been able to appreciate it in different ways. When I watched that as a kid, it was because I watched the cartoon and me and my mate used to do the fucking dance at the end of the episodes, which I'm glad that cameras and films didn't exist. So there's no footage of that. But apparently it happened. But I watched the film because I'd watched the cartoon and my parents went, hey, check this out. And then you get older and then you start to see the jokes and stuff like that. And then you sort of hit your teens and you go, did Ray Stantz get a blowjob off a ghost? And and like eventually, you know, you kind of hit present day and you sort of see some of the more subtle things about, you know, Unity, the city, you know, the real star of the show is New York and the people rather than, you know, and that's one of my favorite films of all time in the same way that RoboCop is as well, because it's a film that I've grown up with and seen at various intervals throughout my life, and being able to approach it differently and apply it differently and stuff to how I am as a person, how the world is around me.
See,
There's not many of us do that.
I'm a little older, so I had a slightly different trip, because when it came out, there was a few years where it really was just RoboCop, and all the kids wanted to see it, but you know, and ended up seeing it anyway. And then as you know, as I was aging out of buying toys and stuff, that's when 2 and 3 hit, and you know, it's just like these aren't very good. So I never saw the cartoon or anything like that. So so yeah, I got industrial strength RoboCop as an 8-year-old. So I got watered down a bit, and yeah, but now it's just like, yeah, you are right, because as a kid, this is awesome, and then you're like, this franchise is kind of crap, and then you come back around and wow, that movie was good.
Yeah, for me that's RoboCop, but it's also Terminator and Terminator 2.
Yeah,
but it's recently with the Doctor Strange thing, there's been a bunch of Twitter folks being like, oh, is this film too violent for a PG-13? This film's gonna
I've
fuck
not seen
kids
that.
up.
I heard it's pretty rough.
No, it's fucking fine.
Oh,
there's a zombie in it. Oh, and I'm like, I spent my childhood watching like Schwarzenegger rip people apart. Like, cut his own skin off his arm.
Yeah, but if you draw a line from the stuff that you were supposed to be watching, like I'm trying to think of like the stuff that I would have been watching around the time that I went and ended up watching RoboCop.
But even, I don't know, like Star Wars, he's got his family skeletonized at the start.
Yeah, well, that's what I was about to say, Star Wars. But even like the day-to-day stuff, like I was watching, I was well into Brave Star, right?
Okay.
Which like that really does suck. But like I was into Brave Star, Thundercats, Ghostbusters, right? And there's a theme throughout all of them, despite when they're trying to teach you not to cross the road and stuff like that. There is a theme that at some point someone's getting their ass kicked in those, like, you know what I mean? Like there's a villain and they fight him and that's it. And or like even stuff like Mask, where it's like a bunch of dudes shooting enemies and stuff like that. But when you look, like, I mean, I'm not an expert in modern children's TV. You know, I'm on a sci-fi podcast talking about a film that came out in the 80s. But but even like a peripheral look towards what is on TV at the minute, like there's nothing like that. So there's no gateway into stuff that is a little bit more, I guess, aggressive, and it deals with things like fighting and monsters and death and stuff like that. So if you're a kid who's been watching whatever's on Cartoon Network at the minute, and you're going straight into like, that's a zombie by Sam Raimi, that might be a much greater jump.
I hope that's his next movie.
I guess the other thing is my mind's been a bit warped by the fact that I've been living in Japan for almost 5 years. Right. And the kids here do watch super gory Demon Slayer every week.
Oh, right. Well, there you go. Yeah.
Like this
utopia.
This anime is like the #1 most popular thing. Like my kindergarten kids all have the merchandise and stuff.
Yeah.
And eventually we were like, oh, well, we're going to do some episodes where we watch the English lessons where we watch the English version. And I sat down and watched it for the first time. And like episode 1 features a bunch of cannibalism and some decapitations with full gore.
No, in
like,
America,
this is what the kids are into? Shit.
You know, on American TV, I believe it's on 11 at night.
It's on 11 at night here. The kids still watch it. Still the #1 most popular thing.
Well, this is it, right? I mean, again, I don't really know, but like, I can only really go off like my nephew who's a kid, and he's really into like all those like weird YouTube like made up horror things like Siren Head and stuff like that. Like he loves that. I had to explain to my mum last Christmas, like, you can't just buy an action figure of Siren Head. She was like, why? It's on the TV. It's like, it's not on the TV, mum. It's a YouTube thing made up by some artist. If you like, you're not just going to be able to go into, Argos and pick this up. But I mean, this sounds like old man shouting at sky at this point, because it is just like things have changed. Kids, they take on media differently. But I think the jump from like everyday kid stuff that they're into to like RoboCop might be, it might be way too much of like a cultural change than what we were kind of watching, which was already a little bit like, if you really think about it, if you boil it down, violent. You know what I mean? Like all of the shows that we were watching, despite they didn't have blood in them, they didn't have swearing in them, they were all a bunch of dudes who solved the problem by fighting something and usually beating it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the, that was kind of like the core through line to it. There was no, we're not just going to talk it out. And I think that like, yeah, maybe that's why there was that stuff about Doctor Strange, that I think that like kids who were seeing it are kind of coming at it from a different attitude to what you were as a kid.
You might be
not
right.
that I'm defending children or anything. Like, they're all bastards.
I didn't see any actual kids or any actual parents complaining. It was all just like 20-year-old Twitter people.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's a whole different, whole different debate.
Because when I was 10, I'd seen and forgotten like every slasher movie made from like 85 to 1990.
Yeah.
That's what I do. Finish school, go across the street and watch some like obscuro slasher film. Like, we didn't watch the proper ones. I still haven't seen all the Halloween or Jason movies.
Yeah, I like, because kids just have access to YouTube and like all these games you can download for free.
Yeah,
I'm sure they're seeing some real fucked up shit their parents don't know about. I teach this one 10-year-old girl, 100%. And every week she's telling me about this Dead by Daylight clone she plays on Roblox. And she's asking me like, how would you rather kill someone, the heart or the throat?
Yeah, that's that. Do you know what's mad? It's mad that you say about that. Like, that's like my nephew as well. Like, there is this kind of like thing where they're into like really morbid stuff.
Yeah,
but hey, maybe that's why it's all right. Like, he seems fine. Like, I mean, obviously someone's going to use as evidence when he fucking shoots me in like 20 years or something like that. But he seems fine. But I don't know. Part of me finds it quite endearing. Like, because obviously my brother doesn't care. He's like me. But like, my mum's like, it's kind of weird that your little nephew's into all this like messed up stuff. And I'm like, Mum, you didn't know what half the stuff that I was watching. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's quite nice to see this sort of, maybe it is being passed down, this kind of thing where you go, oh, I'm watching this film I'm not supposed to. But then there's obviously there could be some negatives that could come from that. But like, for me, I can only speak from my experience. It's kind of like, it was all overwhelmingly positive. I had a great time. I feel like I saw stuff that kind of stuck with me for the rest of my life, but in a positive way. Kind of, it set early lineup for like cool stuff that gave me a sort of a really early education in like, this stuff's really cool. Like, this, you'll like more of this, and also like, there is that thing as well where like people look at films like RoboCop, like Die Hard, Arnie films now, and that we're all getting really old, and they're kind of like these old retro films, but we do have that little badge of honor where we can be like, we were kind of there for when they came out. We got to see them when they were still like culturally relevant. Even though RoboCop, bringing film full circle, is still culturally relevant.
So yeah, I guess that means we can say it holds up. No, I'm perfectly willing to say this is a perfect movie. I mean, what would you change about it? The arms. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, Dick Jones's arms. Yeah. There's nothing you would change about this film. And like, as much as it fills me with terror as to the direction of the human race, it's only getting more and more relevant every single day. Like, this film, it'll be more relevant tomorrow.
If we do this podcast in 10 years' time, it will be like, oh, yesterday I was out on the street and I saw one of the RoboCops walking around.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're heading into a direction where it was like, yeah, RoboCop is real.
You're like, this film doesn't hold up. The real Ed 209s look completely different.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about the closest you're going to get to like a problem with it when the Ed 209s are a bit slicker. But like, it's a perfect film. It's a flawless sci-fi film, and for my money, it ticks those boxes that important sci-fi should do. I sort of mentioned this earlier. It's got that kind of weird dystopia. It's got like weird tech. It's got that brilliant link with the modern day, which make the sci-fi bits seem they stand out more. It's really violent. It's really funny, and
it's got a great human element to tie you into all that sci-fi stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to say it's a perfect film, and I can't imagine anyone hasn't watched it. Like, that's sort of this weird thing, but obviously that's not true. There are people, but it is like, I'm not afraid to say it when it's like, if you haven't watched RoboCop, like, forget about whatever it is that you've got planned to watch next, because it's not as good as this.
Yeah,
just literally stop what you're doing, whatever you're doing. I'm willing to bet it's not as good as RoboCop.
Run, don't walk to watch RoboCop.
Yeah.
You just got to robo walk. You got
I was
the robot to.
I was basically RoboCop walking around the office all day yesterday. I can't help it. Anytime I watch a good robot movie, I find myself I got a robot walk for a couple of days now.
What do you reckon? Just as a sort of like little, because there's not much information out there, just to sort of tap it on the end. What do you reckon? This sort of sequel talk that's kind of kicking around at the minute. Like, I'm deeply concerned. There are two bits of RoboCop media that are sort of look like they're going to appear in the coming years, and one of them I'm cautiously optimistic about, and one of them I'm terrified about, and it's the movie I'm terrified about, because it's been through development hell. It's been passed to about 20 different people. Like, isn't it in the hands of like Aronofsky or something like that? Last time I checked,
it's the original writers, so that's cool. And it was briefly being directed by Blomkamp, which would have been great. District 9.
Yeah.
Chappie, that guy. But now it's like some guy who's just directed some TV, and it looks like it's going to be shot out with like a $2 million budget. So, but if the original writers really lean into, like, this was a satire and it's only become more relevant, there could be a really good sequel to RoboCop.
There could be.
I don't think it's necessary.
It seems too obvious. Like, part of the beauty of RoboCop is how it evolved to this. If they just go in with like, look, then I think that it's a little bit less. Like, part of RoboCop's charm is you'll watch it. If you've never seen RoboCop and you watch it tomorrow, you're going to go, when was this one made? And then when you find out it was 1987, you're gonna be like, oh, I beg your pardon. It's like when you listen to certain parts of like the first Rage Against the Machine album, you're like, this is like 1991 or 92. Like, why, what did they know? You know, what did they know?
This past weekend, I went to karaoke and I did Wake Up by Rage Against the Machine. And a couple of my colleagues had never seen the lyrics before, and they're like, oh, this is really interesting. And then I ruined my throat for like 2 days.
But to not leave it on a total downer of the sequel, I don't know if you guys have played the Terminator video game, Terminator Resistance.
I haven't, but I want to. It came out when I didn't have a PS4.
But it is the single best piece of Terminator media that isn't Terminator 1 or Terminator 2, right?
Okay.
And it's off to a good start because it ignores everything else, right?
Yeah.
So straight away, it's like, right, this is on to a winner. And it's not the best video game ever made. But you can tell that a lot of its problems come from budget. It's clearly a very cheap video game. It's cut a few corners. It doesn't do anything massively unique. It's kind of like half stealth game, half first person shooter, bit of Fallout in there that when you explore the wasteland, nothing too, expansive or, interesting, but it does enough. It's not bad. None of it feels awful. It does enough to be a totally acceptable video game. But what it does do is it treats the Terminator franchise with the utmost reverence. There's obvious stuff, like where it's sort of implied that there's a new Terminator, which would obviously be the one with the skin on. And there's like one of the most frustrating moments in any video game ever is this bit where you see it for the first time, and it's a really cool bit where it's killing all your guys, and eventually it catches up with you and it grabs you and it pushes you up against the wall in first person, and you knock its hood off. And you know, if they just had a little bit more money in the budget, it would have been
Schwarzenegger. Yeah.
But it's not. It's a kind of generic model that looks a bit like Arnie, but also is, for legal reasons, definitely not Arnie. And it sucks because you're looking at it and you go, that would have been right up there. But that's the level they're operating on. And the final level where you assault Cyberdyne base, wherever it is, like the head office of Cyberdyne. But you've got one of those the robots with the tracks and the big thing on the top.
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember called.
T1.
Yeah.
I can never remember which one is the truck and which one is the plane.
Hunter Killer's the plane.
Okay, so this one's the T1.
Yeah. But yeah, you've got one of them that's been hacked to fight alongside you, and the laser gun noises is the exact laser gun noise. And the Terminator theme starts playing in, but it's a big orchestral version. And for about 5 minutes during that final level, it goes from being a modest 6, 7 out of 10 game to a 10. It's a 10. It's a masterpiece. You're sat there going, this is incredible. And you've got all this radio chatter of them going, we've just sent one of them back. We've just got to get the next one through. And it's all this, it's Terminator, and it's what you loved about it. Well, long story short, those guys are doing RoboCop next. Now, I don't expect it to be a particularly good game. And I don't expect RoboCop to lend itself to being a video game anywhere near as good as Terminator does, because Terminator, it's a little bit of an easier sell. I mean, the fact that he can move is probably a better sell than RoboCop. I've got no idea how they're going to do it, but just seeing how much care and attention they put in to making an otherwise bang average Terminator game into something that I considered quite special. I'm fascinated to see what they do with RoboCop, and I'm way more excited about that than the film. And apparently it is set immediately after the first film and ignores 2. It's a continuation, but I'm far more intrigued by what they're doing. Not because I think it's going to be a particularly good game. It's just that they've already convinced me once that they can do they clearly care. And that's, tends to be more than most.
So yeah, I just went on Amazon and added that to my basket.
I don't work for them, by the way, but if they do want to start giving me royalties, I don't think you're the first person I've sold that.
No, I just game on my iPad now, but that does remind me to grab these DS cases for Luke here.
If you don't play video games, if anyone's listening to it and you're not really a big gamer, but you like Terminator, I do highly recommend just looking up a playthrough of the final level.
Yeah. No, you were selling
it is a perfect representation of like the future war, and it also has a version of the Terminator theme that is like really, really good, really good.
Right. So, Andi. At the moment, where can people find you on their internet?
On Twitter, it's at Andi Hero. I'm an idiot, and as you may have already noticed from the last hour and a half, but I spell my name as Andi, not Andy. So it's Andi Hero, ANDIHERO. I've got my finger in too many pies to have anywhere to sort of go, hey, check this out. And I change my mind and do different things all the time. So the best thing to do is look at my Twitter, and if I say, hey, I'm doing this, feel free to check it out, or feel free to not do that. But it's usually about video games, this era of movies, and my beloved Newcastle United football team. So if any of those 3 things tickle your fancy, by all means, pop over.
Don't take this the wrong way, because I love you. But my advice to listeners, don't get attached to a specific Andi project. Just follow Andi.
Just follow me. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, they come and they go. I'm all about the now, and the best thing to do is enjoy them while they're there. And when they all fall apart for a variety of different reasons, just let that be the case. Let's all move on together onto something else.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
if you enjoyed this podcast, we're on Twitter at MLSFS Pod. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all of that bollocks. And if you want to listen to other podcasts that me and Matt create, you can find all of them by going to patreon.com/podcastius. And there you can find links to our other podcasts. And if you feel like it, you can throw us $1 a month to help keep it online, help pay for the Zoom, stuff like that. But we don't put anything behind the paywall. So do what you feel.
Well, we got extended little bits of chatter here and there that you might get if you care.
Basically, we throw up the version we couldn't be bothered to edit on Patreon. So
Right.
you're going to get the stuff that we would otherwise cut. So if you want to hear Andy's real thoughts about various minorities, that's where you got to go.
Citizens, cease and desist your podcast. Okay, I guess I'll do it. So you hear this part if you're on Patreon.
Wait,
Okay.
is this the Patreon bit?
Yeah.
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 Oh,
This
wicked.
is
I
this
assume
is
Matt
so-
was about to press stop, but he just hasn't. So
Right. Right. I'm going to press stop. Then I'm going to take a shower. So thanks. It's your 1:30 now. Okay.
yeah.
It is.
Night
But,
owl.
you know,
That's fine.
it's all good.